In Washington, power isn't given, it's taken. And on this day, Karoline Leavitt did just that. With one speech, she left Congress speechless, exposed the truth behind Adam Schiff's actions, and changed the political landscape forever. But how did she do it? And what led her to this moment? Let's dive in. Karoline Leavitt's journey in politics had never been easy. She was young, ambitious, and determined to carve out her place in a system that often dismissed newcomers. The halls of Congress were filled with career politicians, people who had spent decades perfecting the art of manipulation. But Leavitt wasn't here to play their game. She was here to change the rules. Since stepping onto the national stage, she had faced skepticism, subtle jabs about her inexperience, and outright dismissals from those who underestimated her. But Washington wasn't built for the weak. She knew that to survive, she had to be sharper, faster, and more prepared than anyone else in the room. And then the impeachment hearings happened, a moment that would test her like never before. The nation was glued to their screens, watching as Adam Schiff positioned himself as the moral defender of democracy. He spoke with certainty, conviction, and the media hung on to his every word. But Leavitt wasn't convinced. She saw the cracks beneath the surface. Unlike her colleagues who reacted based on headlines, Leavitt dug deeper. She pored over testimony transcripts, analyzed Schiff's statements, and dissected the hearings with the precision of a prosecutor. And what she found? It changed everything. Schiff had built his case on half-truths and manipulated narratives. His selective framing of testimony, his misleading claims, Leavitt saw it all. But she also saw something more. A chance. A moment to step forward, to cut through the noise, and to expose what was really happening. This wasn't just about Schiff, this was about holding Washington accountable. The night before she took the floor, Leavitt stood in front of her office mirror, rehearsing every word. She wasn't just preparing for a speech, she was preparing for a battle. Her advisors warned her, if you go after Schiff, you're making an enemy of the most powerful Democrats in Washington. But Leavitt didn't flinch. She had spent weeks gathering facts, perfecting her argument, ensuring that every word she spoke would be undeniable. This wasn't just about politics, it was about truth. And when the morning came, as she stepped toward the House floor, she knew one thing for certain. Washington was about to hear her roar. Karoline Leavitt had prepared for this moment like a warrior heading into battle. She had done the research, studied every word Adam Schiff had spoken, and knew exactly where to strike. Now, with the entire chamber watching, it was time to deliver the speech that would change everything. As she walked onto the House floor, there was a palpable shift in the room. Conversations stopped. Lawmakers turned in their seats. Even those who had underestimated her before sensed something was about to happen. She took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium. Then, in a voice calm but commanding, she began. We are here to serve the American people, to defend truth, not political narratives. The first words hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. Some lawmakers leaned in, curious. Others sat stiffly, their expressions unreadable. And across the room, Adam Schiff kept his eyes locked on her, expression carefully controlled, but his fingers tapped against his desk, a telltale sign of unease. Leavitt continued, her voice unwavering. Yet, time and again, we have watched as facts have been manipulated, testimonies twisted. The American people deserve better. They deserve the truth. She wasn't here to throw around accusations. She was here to reveal what others had overlooked. She laid out the facts, detailing how Schiff had repeatedly shaped his statements to fit his own agenda, choosing which details to emphasize and which to ignore. Instead of letting the American people hear the full picture, key elements of the investigation had been strategically framed to create a single, predetermined conclusion. She pointed to moments in the hearings where Schiff had made bold claims that, upon closer examination, relied on speculation rather than solid proof. Her words weren't just criticism. They were a challenge to Schiff, a challenge to Congress, a challenge to the entire system that had allowed political maneuvering to overshadow objective truth. She wasn't just speaking, she was leading. Leavitt's tone grew sharper, her gaze more intense. When we allow one man's ambition to override truth, we don't just fail the American people, we fail the very foundations of our democracy. At that moment, the silence in the chamber became almost deafening. Even seasoned lawmakers, those who had spent decades in politics, realized they were witnessing something different. This wasn't just another floor speech. This wasn't just a young representative making a name for herself. This was a reckoning. Across the room, Schiff finally shifted in his seat. He crossed his arms, his lips pressed into a thin line. Leavitt could feel the energy in the room shifting. She had done it. The truth was out. The narrative was no longer controlled by Schiff, nor by the media. It belonged to the American people now. As she stepped back from the podium, the chamber remained frozen in place. Because for the first time in a long time, Washington was speechless. Karoline Leavitt had just delivered the most powerful speech of her career. The room was frozen. Adam Schiff, the man who had controlled the impeachment hearings, now sat motionless. But the battle wasn't over yet. What happened next would determine everything. The chamber remained eerily silent for a few long, excruciating seconds. Then whispers began. Lawmakers leaned toward each other, exchanging hushed words. Some looked at Schiff. Others kept their eyes locked on Leavitt. Across the aisle, a few Republicans smirked knowingly. They knew what had just happened. A freshman congresswoman had stood up, held her ground, and shattered one of Washington's most carefully crafted narratives. But Leavitt wasn't finished. She took one last step forward, looking directly toward Schiff's side of the chamber. Her next words weren't for the cameras. They weren't for the media. They were for him. Congressman Schiff, if we claim to stand for transparency, if we claim to defend democracy, then we must hold ourselves to the same standard. The American people deserve the full truth, not fragments, not curated sound bites, but every fact, every statement, every piece of evidence. Are you willing to provide that? Or does truth only matter when it serves your agenda? The reaction in the room was immediate. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others remained completely still, waiting to see how Schiff would respond. All eyes turned to Schiff. For a moment, he remained still, gripping the armrest of his chair. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, adjusting his microphone. His voice, when he finally spoke, was controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge of frustration. Congresswoman Leavitt, I appreciate your passion. But passion is not the same as fact. He was trying to regain control, trying to frame her as impulsive, emotional, inexperienced. But Leavitt didn't flinch. Then let's talk about facts, she shot back. The facts you conveniently left out. The context you manipulated. If you're confident in the truth, why not release the full records? Why not let the American people see everything? Schiff paused. For the first time that day, he had no immediate response. Within minutes, the press gallery was alive with activity. Journalists scrambled to their phones, tapping furiously, racing to break the story. The conversation had changed. No longer was this just another congressional speech. It was a direct challenge to Washington's status quo. Leavitt had forced a discussion that the establishment wasn't prepared for. And outside of the chamber, the reaction was growing. People were watching. People were paying attention. Behind closed doors, the real battles began. Senior Republican strategists saw an opportunity. The party had been looking for fresh leadership, someone who could take the fight to the establishment with precision, not theatrics. And Leavitt? She had just proven she could do it. Meanwhile, Schiff's allies were scrambling. Damage control meetings were called. Statements were drafted. The media spin machine went into overdrive. But the damage had been done. A shift had begun. That night, Leavitt sat in her office, watching the media storm unfold. The weight of the moment was sinking in. She had done something most politicians never dared to do. She had taken on one of the most powerful figures in Congress and won. But she knew this was just the beginning. This wasn't about just one speech. It wasn't about Schiff. It was about Washington itself. For too long, the system had protected its own spinning narratives, controlling information, deciding what the American people were allowed to believe. Leavitt had challenged that system. And now, there was no going back. She turned to her staff. We keep going. We push harder. Because this fight, it's only just begun if you believe in truth, in holding leaders accountable, and in real change. This is just the start. Hit subscribe and join the movement. Because Washington may not be ready for Karoline Leavitt, but America is.